For this week's health segment, we turn it over now to our health reporter, Richard Stewart, as he teaches us more about influenza.
Thanks, Dan. Today we're joined by Ed Gisemba. Ed is an epidemiologist at the Cleveland Department of Public Health. He's going to share with us how they go about compiling data that's vital to the health of all Clevelanders. Ed, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Could you explain the process of collecting weekly respiratory disease data for the city of Cleveland, and what specific data points are gathered, and how is the information verified and useful?
Sure. So this information is gathered directly from healthcare facilities themselves, within the scope of their operations. So if a patient goes to the hospital, the emergency department in particular, the chief complaint, the date and time that they're there, all of that is captured, and we're able to pull that data. And for influenza-related hospitalizations, influenza hospitalizations are a Class B reportable condition, so they have to notify the health department within 24 hours. So generally, you find out pretty quickly. We're able to compile that data and put it in a form that we're able to use to report to the public.
Have you noticed any recent trends when it comes to respiratory disease in the city of Cleveland?
I would say that the one trend I could say for sure is that from the beginning of October to the following May of the next year, that's peak upper respiratory infection activity. In between that time frame, it's really hard to speculate general trends, but just know that that's when we're going to see most of the activity.
Talk about the state of COVID-19 in the city of Cleveland. Are we in good shape, bad shape? Where do we stand?
I'd say that we're in good shape as long as we continue to be proactive. This is the time of year where we would expect to see upper respiratory infections in general. So doing what we can in order to prevent illness and prevent spread is what we would recommend. So staying up to date with hospitalizations for flu and COVID would be the best recommendations. We're continuing to see new COVID variants. It's not as severe as it was during the pandemic, but ultimately the goal is to continue to do what we can to have less cases.
How does the Cleveland Department of Public Health determine various thresholds for respiratory diseases such as the flu and COVID-19? Talk about disease activity levels and how that's deciphered for the public consumption.
Sure. So at least for flu, the thresholds are determined by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And the way that the Cleveland Department of Health looks at it is from two different perspectives. One of which is, does activity surpass these thresholds for instance, flu, emergency department visits that are for flu-like illness or for weekly hospitalizations. But we also like to look at that over time. So for instance, we know that flu activity tends to really peak around the holidays. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, that's when we tend to see the most cases for the flu and the most case severity. So we like to report whether or not it's high or low based on that metric, but also, is this a level that we would expect based on this time of the year?
Are there any specific communities or demographics that are more affected than others? And if so, what's the Department of Public Health doing to address those specific disparities?
Sure. I mean, so week to week, it varies in terms of what demographics, what parts of the city of Cleveland residents are being impacted by the flu. There's really two trends that I would say really stick over time. One of which being that our older residents are more prone to a flu, to a hospitalization due to the flu. And for RSV infections, those tend to disproportionately impact children. Outside of that, it really is impacting everyone.
How does the weekly reporting that you guys perform influence public health responses?
Sure. So, our job as a health department is to inform the public regarding the status of the health of the city collectively. And flu is just one of those examples. Whereas I mentioned, between that 7-month period, it's really a toss-up in terms of what things could look like in terms of upper respiratory infection. We know that each flu season is not the same. There's some years where we're hit particularly hard early. There are some years where it seems to be a fairly moderate level and then skyrockets. So we'd like to let residents know how bad is it from week to week so they can make informed health decisions.
You mentioned allowing residents to know. How do you go about doing that? How do you make the data accessible to the public?
Sure. So we publish a weekly flu report or influenza watch every week, every Friday afternoon. And previous reports are also available to the city. So they'd be able to go on our webpage and see how flu activity has looked like so far this season, as well as in previous years.
Ed, thank you for joining us and sharing this valuable information with the public.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
He's Ed Gisemba, epidemiologist at the Cleveland Department of Public Health. I'm health reporter Richard Stewart. Back to you, Dan.